Hello everyone, this is Eugeniusz Romer and welcome to the YouTube channel of Układ Sił, a foreign policy magazine from Poland. Today we are going to discuss the situation in Serbia, the mass protests against the government and against the corruption which is attributed to the Serbian authorities. And I'm hosting Nikola Burazer from the Center of Contemporary Politics, an independent think tank from Serbia. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, media have recently reported that the protesters on this weekend were dispersed by sonic weapons, which are usually used in military purposes. So it sounds like a huge violation of democratic principles. So there were hundreds of thousands of people in Belgrade. So is it really true? Because the government is denying and the president said he's going to investigate this, but this is not true. So how it is in reality?
Well, first of all, what we had on Saturday was a really large protest with even the most conservative estimates being that there were 300,000 people in the street, which is around 5% of total population in Serbia, and more realistic assessments put that number as high as 500,000 or even higher. And the most important thing about this protest is actually that it was a peaceful protest. So there were no incidents in the protest, and it came as a culmination of 4 months of protests, which were entirely peaceful, and the only violence that ever occurred on these protests actually came as a consequence of the government's actions. So now you had this insanely huge crowd in the streets of Belgrade, which was once again peaceful, once again did not stage any incidents. The whole day went very peacefully, but then what happened at approximately 7 p.m. During the traditional 15 minutes of silence for the 15 victims of the Novi Sad accident, some really strange things happened. First of all, there were attacks by some, let's call them hooligan groups that are affiliated with the government on the peaceful protesters. And at the same time, there was this mass stampedo, which happened on this street where the crowd was basically the most concentrated in. And there are really strong suspicions that that was a consequence of some kind of a sonic or experimental weapon. Now, the problem, of course, is that everyone in Serbia is very unfamiliar with these things. Such topics were never big in Serbia to discuss, what kind of weapons, even exist and how they can be used. And, this incident is very strange in the sense that it's hard to prove what actually happened. Some time needs to pass, and the government did not give any kind of explanation which would be sufficient. They did not even try to give some kind of explanation and to argue that they're innocent in this. We only saw individual, parts of the government, like the police or the military, saying no, none of us did it, which leaves a lot of room for suspicion that this was actually done by some other parts of the government, meaning the security services or maybe even some criminal structures associated with the government. And the reason why, we have these strong suspicions that it was a deliberate attempt by the government to disperse the crowd and cause chaos is because of everything which happened in the week before the protest. So the government did everything it could to frighten the demonstrators by announcing that there will be violence, that the government will unleash its full power to show to the citizens its full power. And most importantly, the government brought next to the protest venue a huge crowd of people, some with criminal backgrounds, some with war crime backgrounds, who were standing next to the protest venue, surrounded by barbed wire, protected by the police. And they brought even some tractors, to serve as a wall between these people and the protesters. So it was very, very evident that they were either intimidating citizens, planning something with all these criminal groups, or maybe both. So to both basically dissuade the people from coming to the protest and then maybe staging something. And having in mind that these incidents happened at 7:10 approximately, so in the 11th or 12th minute of these 50 minutes of silence, we're talking here about a huge crowd numbering several hundreds of thousands of citizens, which was entirely peaceful and silent. And attacking, this crowd in this moment shows a deliberate attempt to sow chaos. And there are all kinds of rumors now, which haven't been really confirmed yet, about attacks from different directions by some let's say, controversial groups, about stones being thrown from the buildings, about different kinds of, explosive devices, non-lethal, of course, used to sow more chaos. All of this is still unconfirmed. But the overall impression that we have about this incident is that the government coordinated, their actions to sow as much chaos as possible.
So it's devastating to hear that. So you mentioned the Novi Sad accident, which took part in November. A roof or a canopy at a railway station just collapsed on people, and it sparked fury because it was newly renovated, and it was opened by the president in 2022, as far as I know. So why actually such an accident sparked such huge protests? Because as you mentioned, 15 people were dead, but many people, they just say it's a part of the bigger problem in Serbia, which is corruption, and the state is not funding, giving enough funds for public infrastructure and public services. So what do you say? What's your opinion on that?
I would say there are two explanations for this. The first is that dissatisfaction among the Serbian citizens was already high. And you have had several elections in the last few years which ended with a convincing victory by the ruling coalition, but which were very controversial in terms of electoral fraud, manipulation of electoral results, organized voter migration to influence local elections, and so on. So basically, you can say that dissatisfaction was already very high, but there was no opportunity to channel it through, let's say, political channels, meaning it was there, in the society, and the election result did not reflect, let's say, this opinion by the citizens. And it happened already in the past that these kind of, let's say, non-strictly political events can trigger large protests. Like, for example, we had huge protests in 2023 with the two mass shootings in May, one in the school in Belgrade, the other one, in two villages also near Belgrade, where a lot of children, young people were killed. This triggered huge protests in Belgrade and other cities. So people were very angry at the overall state of the Serbian society, and they were calling out the government for not doing enough to prevent or promoting the culture of violence and impunity, which led to this being possible. Basically, once again, now with this canopy fall, you saw how something which is not strictly political can trigger really, really large protests because of this huge anger and dissatisfaction, which was not channeled through political means, as it probably should be in the past. The second explanation is that it wasn't just the canopy fall which triggered the protests. When the canopy fell, people were shocked, they were moved, they were sad. Anger was not the main, let's say, emotion at this point. But what we saw immediately after the canopy fall was, let's say, a series of lies and propaganda campaigns by the government to somehow shift the blame away from themselves. They quite openly lied on the very first day, claiming that they renovated the whole railway station, but not the canopy. They literally said, we did not touch the canopy, and therefore it's the fault of the engineers who built the railway station back in the 60s or 50s, and not their own responsibility. It surfaced very quickly that there were images of the of the canopy being renovated, we very quickly had whistleblowers who testified about improper conduct of these repairs, about possible corruption, etc. And the government did not address it at all. They simply refused to accept any responsibility. All the media were writing about the old canopy to somehow put it in people's minds that what actually was renovated was not the canopy, it was something completely different. And people got really angry because of all of this, and they started protesting, demanding resignations, which also did not happen until maybe 3 or 4 days after the canopy fall, which was too late, because then the anger has already amassed, and then the government once again, did not understand how big the anger was. They started with their usual campaigns. When they're faced with pressure, when they're faced with accusations, first they deny everything, then they counterattack. They accuse everyone who is criticizing of being the enemy of the state, etc. They use the full might of the propaganda machinery against these people, and now we have seen how all of this backfired. So they simply raise more anger. But one of the main factors, why we're talking about such large protests at this moment is the fact that the students have actually joined these protests back in November. In late November, they started with blockades of their own universities, and these later spread, to other social groups. So including the academia, I mean the professors, lots of schools, high schools, even elementary schools, workers in different sectors. So basically, the students were the catalyst for making these protests so large. As a social group, as a group which is untouchable with this kind of propaganda that the regime usually uses, they were able to mobilize huge masses, and all the attacks the government did against the students. So, verbal campaigns, propaganda campaign, these incidents with people hitting students with cars, all of this just raised more anger and more support for the students. And now we're literally seeing probably 10% of the state, or probably more than that, who are actively protesting in the streets, and who are more and more angry and more, let's say, willing to change something in the society.
But eventually the government started to react, because the prime minister, as far as I know, he said he's going to resign, and some people were detained, about 11. So this thing is going to be investigated. But the main strongman, of course, in Serbia, the president, Aleksandar Vučić, he said he's not going to resign, and he's being attacked, as you said before, by the protesters. He even said that they want to kill him, and if they try to, he's going to fight back. So do you think that anything is going to really change in Serbia because of those protests?
Well, first I have to say that the prime minister resigned in late January, but his resignation was not yet accepted by the National Assembly, meaning that officially he did not resign yet. So this is an evidence of the mockery that political institutions in Serbia have become, when you had the resignation which was not accepted by the parliament for almost 2 months, and therefore the government still did not basically resign, and the laws that this government have proposed are adopted normally in the parliament, and the ruling majority simply refuses to acknowledge this resignation. So it's all a mockery. This is another argument about how this destruction of democratic institutions basically led to such huge protests, and why they cannot be channeled through regular political institutions. This is a very interesting situation that Serbia finds itself in right now, because you have this huge mobilization, you have these huge crowds. Most of these people, they demand the change of the government, they demand the change of the regime. But the students who are, let's say, the main driver of these protests, they are the official organizers of these largest rallies that we have in Serbia. There are other kinds of rallies around the country, but these biggest rallies are all organized by the students. They actually do not demand resignation of anyone. They have their 4 demands, which come down to publication of all documentation surrounding the canopy renovation, the arrest of all attackers on the students, and the cessation of criminal proceedings against the students and other citizens for protesting. and the fourth demand is the increase of the budget for education. So these demands are not tied to anyone's resignation or any kind of change in personnel. They can theoretically be fulfilled by this current government, and the students would, theoretically speaking, stop with the protests the very next day or whatever. They would, basically say that the demands were fulfilled. But this is now already lagging behind what the overall feeling in society is. You have huge crowds, you have a huge number of citizens, and the main, message you can hear in the streets, the main theme is the resignation of the government, but not in the form of the Prime Minister Vucevic, because nobody really cares about him or anybody else in the government. There is only one figure in this country who is actually important, and this is the President Vucic, who is completely unconstitutionally running the country. And not even his resignation would actually change anything, because the problem is that without the conditions for free and fair elections, there could be no change of the government, having in mind that the government would always use different kinds of mechanisms, such as intimidation of voters, such as vote buying, and different kinds of pressures to manipulate the results. So basically, Serbia finds itself in a very deep political crisis that nobody sees an exit out of at this point. It remains to be seen whether the students will update their demands, whether they will acknowledge that this government is not willing or it's not possible for the government to fulfill the demands, or maybe some other group, some other actor would come out with some of their own demands and then shift the entire protest movement in some other direction. It's a very confusing moment even for us here in the country, but the main point is that this faction, this number of people, does not only show how many people are against the government. It shows how much the paradigm has shifted in terms of that there is now much less fear of consequences if you go out and protest, if you come out and and speak loudly against the government, especially in smaller places, smaller towns and villages across Serbia, where now people are almost without any fear, where they are not passive anymore, they're not really taking all of this anymore, and this is a tectonic shift that I don't really see how it can be, let's say, silenced, and how can it be stopped unless we see a major authoritarian crackdown and Serbia ending up like Belarus.
But just to make clear, you're saying basically that Serbia is not a democratic country, and even though there is an election, it's not fair, right? It's a fraud. It's rigged by the ruling party and the president Vucic, because this is what, of course, Serbian opposition says, right? That you can have an election, but the ruling party has profound influence on media, on state institutions, and it's almost impossible for anyone else to win the elections.
Yes, Serbia is something which others have defined already as a spin dictatorship, meaning it's not a fully authoritarian regime such as the one in Belarus or Russia, where you have dictators basically using sheer violence to silence the critics. This is a country where you do have, theoretically speaking, free elections where everybody can participate, where there is no a very clear censorship, and especially not on the internet, etc. So in theory, we can always imagine a government change through elections, but in practice, this is impossible because of different ways how the government can manipulate the elections. Well, first of all, the media, they're the biggest problem that we face. Maybe when we're talking about democracy in Serbia, there is not just media bias. We're talking about almost complete media capture, where almost all mainstream media are weaponized as propaganda outlets of the government, who do not care, not even 1% about the truth, about the facts, about the standards, about whatever. They can lie whatever, they can say whatever, like they can call out the opposition leader tomorrow of trying to kill someone if they want to, and nobody can say no, right? Because nobody can deny this, because there is nowhere to deny, because these media are not, they're not respecting any standards, or they don't have any limits in how propagandistic they're allowed to be. And this is not just something which can be seen in the campaigns. This is a 13-year-old process now where a lot of people have in the meantime been disgusted by any kind of opposition or critics, where all these narratives about, foreign mercenaries and traitors, enemies of the state have become so strong that it's hard to somehow convince the people now that this is all fake and that this is just one trick that the government uses. We had other kinds of manipulation that the government used in elections, like for example, in 2023 they used basically an organized migration of voters to influence local elections. They split the elections in two parts, so that one part of local election will be held in December 2023, and the other part will be held in the spring or summer. Later, it turned out to be in June 24, and then they basically allowed themselves to shift voters back and forth to register them on fake addresses so they can influence local elections on different localities. And this is really making the elections completely meaningless, if this is what the government uses, because talking about individual people going and maybe shifting from one place to another. We're talking about an organized process where you have the Ministry of the Interior, you have the Ministry of Local Administration. All of them somehow have to be on board. It has to be a whole system in place to allow it to happen. And basically, this made people even angrier. And as a consequence of all these manipulations, but also some infighting in the opposition, the turnout in the next elections, when they happened in June last year, were much, much lower. So citizens feel that they cannot influence election results, that they cannot change anything. The government does have, I would say, a substantial level of popularity among the general population, but still, with all of these mechanisms that they use, buying votes, pressuring voters, and manipulating electoral results, it's simply impossible or very hard to imagine that they would lose power.
So let us now discuss the geopolitical implications of this situation, this accident, and those protests we are discussing. Because, as far as I know, the Chinese were involved in this renovation, and this is a part of a bigger investment, a railway roads between Belgrade and Hungary and Budapest. So, do you think? And I assume this is also a part of the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese government. So do you think that this will somehow influence the relations between China and Serbia and Hungary, maybe?
Well, the Serbian government relies heavily on investments and loans from China, especially for these infrastructure projects. And this is what the irony is, actually, of this whole situation, that the Serbian government is really proud of their achievements in infrastructure and building roads and building railways and building, infrastructural buildings such as the Novi Sad railway station. And this was one of the things which everybody more or less acknowledged as an accomplishment. There were always controversies about where did the money come from or what kind of deals there were, but at least people could say, okay, they did build all of these things, and this is something which, has to be acknowledged. And now this particular, aspect of their work now proved to be the most controversial, because it turned out there is actually not only corruption in these deals, but corruption which kills people because it's something was not done properly. Now, of course, the question is what will happen now in the future. The Serbian government probably will not stop, its partnership with China. It's too important for the Serbian government, so it will likely continue. I don't see that the popularity of China, the image of China has changed now, because of this tragedy. The whole focus is on the Serbian government and their own deals. Because, one of the reasons why the Serbian government favors Chinese investments and loans to European ones is that, with China, they agree on these direct, intergovernmental deals where there is a lot of open space for corruption with the hiring of subcontractors, which can be done without tender, which can be done to basically, satisfy the clientelist network of the government. And this is most probably what we have seen with the Novi Sad railway station renovation. There were already suspicions about this happening, not only suspicions, but I would say evidence of this happening in the past in different projects which were supported by China. But now this is the first time that this has had little consequences.
So maybe at the end we can give some context of geopolitical situation of Serbia. So formally, as far as I know, Serbia wants to join the European Union, but many experts say that this is just a pretense to get some money from the EU or to get some access to the European market. But some also say that Serbia is a somehow of Trojan horse of Russia in Europe. So how would you describe the general geopolitical landscape of Serbian position in the region?
I would say it's neither. So the Serbian government cannot turn its back on the EU. It has to pursue European integration because of access to funds, because of attracting investments, and because of relying on external support of the European Union to justify basically its governance. And in that sense, the Serbian government pursues European integration solely because it is in the interest of the government to stay on the EU path. But there is no political will whatsoever to implement the necessary reforms to genuinely make the country prepared for EU membership and to actually join the EU. I do not believe that there is this ambition at all in the Serbian government unless somebody allows Serbia to join the EU, or maybe some, let's say, some of these circles of the EU, if they exist in the future, where the Serbian government would not have to actually reform significantly and could stay a semi-authoritarian regime which somehow benefits from this association with the EU. On the other hand, I also do not see that Serbian government is in reality a Russian Trojan horse. This is an oversimplification of what the Serbian government is actually doing. So the Serbian government, is basically playing out all these actors against each other. So the Serbian government is most certainly counting that this fear of Serbia turning towards Russia will make the EU be more lenient, be more positive about the Serbian government, trying to lure it towards itself, not let it slip away towards Moscow. And this cooperation with Russia is also something which can satisfy the Serbian citizens who hold pro-Russian views, and we're talking about a large number of people, especially the voters of the ruling party. So the Serbian government, benefits from these ties to Russia. So as a scarecrow in front of the EU, and as basically something which will appease its own nationalist voters. But on the other hand, I wouldn't say that Serbian foreign policy is in any way controlled by Russia. It's an individual, independent actor which actually aims to benefit from this whole situation. So we know that Serbia is helping arm Ukraine and actually contributes significantly to the Ukrainian defense by selling artillery shells, which the Ukrainian army uses. We know it's something very important for the EU and the United States, and for Ukraine, of course. But Serbian citizens do not really know about this because they're being fed with different kinds of stories where basically Russia is the friend and Ukraine is, well, also some kind of a friend, but not that we are helping them against our friends, the Russians. So, in the eyes of the West, Serbia is an ally, they actually rely on to some degree in helping Ukraine, also keeping the Western Balkans stable, not allowing some of these, let's say, conflicts to erupt. But, the picture presented with the domestic public is completely different. And basically Serbia is, having this kind of a balanced policy, which is opportunistic. It's an extension of domestic politics. And, it will shift depending on the shifts in the global arena. So, for example, if there is more pressure on Serbia to align with EU sanctions on Russia, if there is more pressure and more need for Serbia to somehow become closer to the policy of Brussels, then Serbia will have to, align itself more. But if there is more leeway, if there is more space, they will definitely come closer to Russia and basically use this opportunity to basically, exploit these divisions.
Thank you, Nikola, for this very insightful interview. I was hosting Nikola Burazer from the Center for Contemporary Politics, an independent think tank from Serbia. Thank you again.
Thank you for the invitation.
And many thanks to our viewers. Goodbye.